Welcome, everyone. So, for those that don't know us, my name is Josefa Domingos. I'm a physiotherapist, and joining me is John Dean as well. What is a speech language pathologist, and so we are going to try to attempt to do a little summary of what the main, I would say, outcomes that we perceived as important to bring to you regarding the latest Congress that existed for Parkinson. So throughout the Congress, what happened, they had actually a podcast they invited people to give their perspective of what they thought was important of each day. And I'm sharing this with you so that you understand that this is things that either John or I were present during these sessions or came across that was interesting to share with you. So hopefully we made a good selection for you. And for anyone that doesn't know this Congress, this is basically an annual event that happens where all the health professionals come together and they will share all the updates or reflect on key information regarding care in Parkinson and how we're treating it, how we're evaluating it. So it's one of the highlights of the year for anyone that's working specifically in this area.
And I would say that the International Parkinson and Movement Disorder Society, or what we used to call the MDS, it's the largest governing body for all of us internationally. There's about 13,000 members worldwide. And if you're working with a movement disorder specialist, it's quite likely, if not almost guaranteed, that they are a member of this organization and that they are coming either to this Congress or getting the updates after the fact. It's really the largest event of its kind every year.
Every year we choose a theme, and this year it was, as it could only be, artificial intelligence, right? And looking at different ways that it can be applied in health so that it can guide us into better care. We'll give different examples, a great enthusiasm around collecting a lot of data, making sense of it, and that machines can really help us do things faster. But obviously, there was also reflections on limits on this, which means that sometimes having more data doesn't really mean it's better data. So we just have to find ways to use all the data that we collect through these systems. But anyway, so what you can see in this photo, I love this photo because it really shows how interesting our students are, right? So this, the scientific community is mostly, here it's mostly medical doctors, physicians, less health professionals, but allied health professionals. But it covers the whole multidisciplinary team. And what we had about 4,500 attendees, which is a significant number.
It's one of these things where we always try to travel to it. Not everyone can go to every single one, but this one was pretty well attended. I think next year in Honolulu will be extremely well attended, but that's really secondary. We're really here to judge.
For different reasons. Well, it's good. That means all your medical doctors or professionals will have a nice holiday around this Congress, and so they'll come nice and cheerful after. So this is from the focus of John and my experience, right? And we chose 3 different topics that we thought interesting things were coming out. One was concerning wellness, so the keywords of exercise, holistic care, technologies as well, a lot of things coming in through there. And then obviously thinking about what are they mentioning about pharmacological approaches, which, as I said, it's a very physician-focused Congress. So lots of the topics are very in-depth about the causes of the symptom that they choose to discuss, and then going through the whole spectrum of treatment, pharmacological treatment, and then touching slightly on non-pharmacological interventions. So it's quite interesting to see a global picture about how we're tackling any symptom of Parkinson.
And it's interesting to see the doctor's perspective on there, because the section that I lead, the Allied Health Professionals section, which has nearly 3,000 people out of the 13,000. It only started in 2012.
I put in an hour, unless it's...
Hold on, we got something here.
It's okay.
You help with that, Josefa? Mm-hmm. You got somebody talking.
I was going to say it was 4 days. It was so intense that I'm hesitating to say 4 days, right? Of very intense learning. One of these topics was actually placed in this theme, which is called holistic care. And which comes in line with wellness as well. So these are key words that are starting to come out that you'll probably see in research papers and it's almost like we're replacing some of the terminology that we used to use about, exercise, diet, and everything is going to go into holistic care now. It seems so. So when we think about specific things that in this area that obviously is related to my work as well, I wanted to just tell you that when you go to Philadelphia, everyone thinks of Rocky Balboa. At least the people I talk, especially if you're. So, of course, as you can imagine, our first research attempt to see, is it possible to run up the stairs? And I was very happy and fortunate to have someone with Parkinson that's running up these stairs with me. Unfortunately, the video is not coming out as well as we wanted to. But this was one of my ultimate goals of going to Philadelphia.
I beg your pardon. Just get rid of the audio. Yes, that was the one thing that we're like, hi, we got to go to this really important Congress, but we have to visit the Rocky Balboa statue at the art museum. So.
But now seriously thinking about the first session, which is usually a session that is thought out with some care, and it was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating to see that the first approach was regarding non-pharmacological interventions, which actually used a new word, which was the holistic care. And so there was a special focus on different types of interventions and topics that often are not discussed, namely, for example, the research gaps that we have for women specifically. So imagine someone that has Parkinson and is pregnant, or the effects of menopause on Parkinson as well. So there's certain specific things related to gender that have to be studied. And here we was just highlighting the research throughout the year that came out regarding this. And on the other part, also thinking about how can we deliver better diagnosis. Many people usually saying how important that moment probably defines how you will manage your disease, right? So the way you receive your diagnosis is actually studied that it will influence your prognosis. This is clinical data, which means that we should probably focus more on capacitating, I would say, the medical community, and I think we're going to need the patients' voices on this, on how to better deliver a Parkinson diagnosis. And you can all imagine how difficult that must be for each clinician. But even worse for who receives it, obviously. And next one, John. So as we were highlighting, this terminology was used, and which just simply means that we are including other things into non-pharmacological care besides the usual exercise, diet, and sleep. And if we change to the next slide, I'll show you. You can get a big picture about what we are talking about. If you start from the left to the right, you have things that haven't been targeted in terms of research. Research is important so that we can validate that whatever we are suggesting to the person actually has been tested for safety and for efficacy. And so you have things like chocolate, the efficacy of chocolate for that. How can chocolate affect Parkinson? The use of, no, I wouldn't say the having furry animals and the impact it can have. Obviously, there has been reports on its potential benefit, but it hasn't been highly researched yet. So going from the left to the right, you can see that there's a whole scope of things that people can use or have potentially used that can help in Parkinson.
Are you sharing your screen?
Yes, we are. You can't see the screen?
No, I see you and I see John. Sorry.
Are you on an iPad or are you on a computer?
Computer.
Press alternate tab, Walt, and see if that gets you back to a screen where you can see. You just press Alt and Tab, and it should. If you're on a PC, are you on a PC?
Oh, Mac.
Okay, so whatever the Windows key or the Mac Apple key and Tab should do the same thing. The command or whatever that is there. It's the one that looks like a little.
Everyone else can see the PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry,
Okay.
everybody.
No worries.
Yes.
We gave time for everyone to go through this weird list, right? You have very interesting things here. I think the furry animals for me is the one that highlights more. Religion is also there, but it was hidden. And then obviously with more evidence, and you will hear this so much, right? The effect of allied health, multidisciplinary teams, and exercise were the strongest. But it's good for us to have solutions. Now we just need to organize them, because then it just might be a little bit overwhelming on where to focus your attention. And the next one, John? Yes. I did highlight this one in particular for my groups here in Portugal. And I just want to share with you that it was the most devastating news that I brought to them, which there was a reference that maybe wine was potentially not as good as we thought it was for Parkinson. So especially my young onset group that we have here in Portugal, a non-profit that I started, they were very sad with this news, because we in Portugal really appreciate a good wine. I usually recommend to people to, until we have better evidence, that we should potentially just self-assess and just see how you feel with the effect of wine. And then take that as a decision, because you'll have different opinions from the clinicians. And so now what happens when you have in an international congress where all the health professionals have been submitted to this knowledge, you might be hearing the doctors maybe be a little bit more cautious about saying, okay, just drink 1 cup per meal is a very common recommendation that they do here in my country.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I remember Dr. Kluger would always be like, a drink. And he's like, the key word is a single, not plural. And I think that's something that maybe Dr. would still adhere to. But again, I think the evidence, this is where research starts off, and we all get really excited about resveratrol. And then the research starts to really look like, well, maybe it actually, it seems highly anticipated. They weren't doing bad stuff before. This wasn't like big wine, gaming the system so much as it was. We just figured out that it wasn't as helpful.
Yeah. So I think you can imagine if you are a clinician, you're sitting there, you're hearing these recommendations, and then obviously you take what's in this case for me, this called my attention, because I know that I go to many events with people with Parkinson young onset, and they do tend to have lots of drinks, and I'm always curious about the effect that it has over their Parkinson. And there's always this discussion, and then it's always like, oh, you're just being silly, wine is good for you, right? So it's I think it takes long before everyone gets to a consensus that it might not be so good. And for now, I think the best recommendation is just assess and discuss that with your doctor that knows you better.
And I would eat as much chocolate as you can before they find out that that's not good for us either. So. Okay.
Yeah, so also on the topic of exercise, there were lots of posters. So the whole Congress is combined about talks and different types of talks, smaller ones or bigger ones. And then also the younger researchers exposing their work through posters, scientific posters, which usually reflects smaller interventions that are done and then are highlighted. And the regarding exercise, we keep validating the use of aerobic exercise, and examples of aerobic exercises like anything that elevates your heart rate, like treadmill or walking, or like boxing or swimming. All these will be types of exercises that will fit into this category of aerobic exercise. And so we're just reinforcing and validating more and more the type of exercise. And then we had aquatic interventions also with some interest. And obviously telehealth as well as a way to get to more people and to reduce the burden and also the access to care.
I see the telehealth space, and I'll get into it when I talk about technologies, as changing very quickly. And I think a lot of people are realizing the convenience and the ability to get to a real expert, because you might have difficulty traveling that far so you can get to somebody. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think the one that was more highlighted, this is something that actually John and I are very passionate about, and I'm just passionate about it because I see its efficacy on a daily basis. It's something that I've been studying for a couple of years, and so it's nice to see that it finally gets to be referenced in a congress like this. So in order for the topic to be selected, it goes through a very crucial and rigorous process. So to actually have this highlighted, that we probably have more benefit, that we potentially have more benefit when we do more complex exercises. And by complex is something that will challenge you physically and cognitively. And one of the areas that was more highlighted is in the next slide is regarding walking, which is we compare different type of parameters. Now remember, all these slides we're just showing you so we can talk about it, but these are very scientific talks. And so we have different things that have inside when we talk about walking, about the speed, about the space between your feet, about the rhythm. So there's different components of walking that were shown to be better improved when people trained under cognitive and motor conditions when compared to just walking by itself. So just walking and doing walking training improves, obviously we have, but it's just to say that we have more benefits when we have this cognition associated to it.
I also really like it. This is something that we have said for many years, is that we believe that you can mimic real life circumstances, real life activities with the dual task. And here it's nicely seen in an actual study from this group out of southern Italy. So moving along, guys, as we look at technologies, this is the situation where I think when we were in Copenhagen last year, the conference was in Copenhagen. There were as many technology companies as there were pharmaceutical companies in the main halls there, and that's a big change. I think it's growing. It's going to continue to grow. Actually, with one of my positions in the organization, I'm part of the web editorial board, so I chair one of the web editors sections, and we work on listing and certifying a bunch of different technologies, and I think that's coming. I will say that I believe that wearables are really having a moment right now. These are all what we call research grade devices, so you can't go to the store and buy them. But I would say that looking at the studies of exercise and looking at a number of studies for pharmacological, medicines, that they all appear to be using wearables as some kind of measure. It's not the primary measure because the FDA doesn't recognize a digital outcome for the purposes of approving a medication, but they're being implemented along the side of it. And it just tells me that the companies are getting close to hopefully getting something approved by the FDA so that you can wear something 24/7, wear a watch or wear this stat-on halter or whatever these devices are, and show progress over time in a way that you would normally have to go in and have the doctor do this UPDRS test with you. So this is cool. Again, these are all not available to consumers, although stat-on, the one in the center, you wear it like a little halter. You wear it like a device that you would wear on your belt. They actually very wisely, after meeting people at the World Parkinson's Congress in Barcelona, which is a program focused for people with Parkinson's, they actually made a consumer products division. And so they are actually allowing individuals with Parkinson's to grab this high quality data. I have a friend who's undergoing DBS right now who's using it in the analysis. So that's one area there. And again, it's getting stronger and faster and smarter, but also at the same time, there are consumer products out there. So there are consumer wearables using the Apple Watch, and then you use it with an app. And so Apple, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, put out basically an algorithm within their software developers kit, and you can implement it directly. And those products have been FDA approved, so they actually are reimbursable now. And the company here on the left, Strive PD, Rune Labs, has put that out with something that anyone who has an Apple Watch and an iPhone can download for free and use. And then several other companies did that as well, but theirs are only available by prescription. So Parky's one, Neuro RPM, which is right there in Maryland, is another one. RPM stands for remote patient management. So I didn't feature them here because you're really never going to see them unless you're in a study. But these are ones that are coming. And then the Rune Labs group, the former Googler, people who worked for Verily, the Google company, the Google healthcare company, they have started working with Kaiser Permanente in California. And so they published this very interesting poster. It wasn't a full presentation. And they had a cohort of 138 people living with Parkinson's, a lot of them in their kind of early mid stages, so stage 2, stage 3. And they were able to, with this monitoring, reduce emergency room visits. We're able to do a significant reduction in the amount of time that a movement disorder specialist had to do hands-on stuff so they could just focus on clinical care with you. And it also helped with things like medication adherence and exercise adherence. Rune Labs has made a point of partnering with a lot of big exercise entities like Rocksteady and LSVT to be part of their platform as well. So this is not done. I still see a lot of room for growth in all these projects, but it's nice to see, one, that they've managed to get a partnership with Kaiser, which is the largest healthcare system in California by far, and they're starting to show data. This reminds me where Josefa's PhD advisor with their ParkNet, where they were able to get these kind of benefits, reduction in falls, reduction in cost for falls, and then improvement in care. Fitbits, which are just general consumer devices that you can buy at a Best Buy, are also being implemented in studies, not as a primary outcome measure, although you could use that, so you could have a Fitbit alongside a real study, but in more unique ways. And we encountered this it's a young researcher at Columbia named Elisa Pacheco, and she was talking about her work using the Fitbit as a motivational tool. So the study would have people on board during COVID times and learn how to exercise properly, and then use the tool to provide them with compliance data. How well were they sticking with it? It's pretty cool. It's a nice implementation, and what I like about it, again, is that it's a consumer product that everyone has. When you get into a dedicated wearable that is for a research project, now you're wearing your Fitbit or your Apple Watch plus some other device, and you start to look a little like either you really like technology or you're on house arrest. I can't figure it out, so it's a lot. One kind of cool thing that I was talking with her, we went out to with them one night, is that she was able to capture Dr. Pacheco, or she's a candidate now, soon to be Dr. Pacheco, was capturing very interesting sleep data from the Fitbit. And in the past, that kind of data wasn't very valuable. The actigraphy, meaning the motion capture, sleep data wasn't very good, but they've actually stepped up their games quite a bit. They worked with a good EEG manufacturer, a brain monitoring manufacturer, and so I think that'll be her next best publication. And that's kind of what I'm excited about. I don't think as someone living with Parkinson's that it's your job to be logging everything you do all day, and it's like social media, but for yourself. It's a bad model. I think it should be all captured there, and then we can use that data to do something interesting, and I see it coming. Speaking to what Josefa said specifically about AI being kind of the theme, artificial intelligence, Dina Katabi at MIT was the keynote speaker, and I've actually seen her speak on this project now maybe 3 or 4 times because it's really exciting. It's called the Emerald project, and Emerald looks like basically a Wi-Fi router that fits on a wall, and it puts out a signal, and then that signal is used as kind of like a micro radar in your house, and it provides pretty granular information about movement and activity and falls. When I say granular, I mean you can see someone basically, I won't play the video here, but you can literally see someone turning in a small circle around, and you can see exactly where they're going. And what I love about this approach, and what I think we're all excited about, is that you can capture this information very non-invasively. It's not a camera. You're not going to have to worry about someone getting a picture of somebody in a way that makes people uncomfortable. It's just a radar signal, and it can just place someone in a space. So it's something that we're all looking at, and they're actually able to capture other data that they haven't quite got there yet, but will be eventually for sleep and other respiration and other things. The respiration, I think they actually do have. So I think this is what's coming. I'm very interested.
I think one of the discussions in the people place questions was about how do we control the data that we don't want to be captured. So which means if you have family and friends over, and then there's data about everyone that's in the room. So there was interesting pros and cons discussion after about we still have to figure out the ethical gathering of all this data. How do we control that?
I think that's going to be the biggest thing to solve, because even though this is not a camera, there's going to be a lot of information available. And even when we talk about voice biometrics, which again don't identify someone specifically, you can deconstruct that, and I think that's problematic. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that because I think my take is that our legislators are often a little behind when it comes to figuring out what the internet can and can't do, and I think that's going to be even worse when we get to artificial intelligence. But nonetheless, it's a nice approach, and again, it's a big leap forward in a way that it's not another wearable. It doesn't require a camera. It's not as invasive as other approaches. If you ever get to see it, I mean, I just put it on there, but that's an interesting video. They talk a lot about it if you want to look more at it. I think they're doing a study right now. We had a session on swallowing and speaking and people living with Parkinson's, and I'm sorry that they call them patients, but they always do at these congresses. They don't use person first. We always say patients in these environments, but people living with Parkinson's and the swallowing and the speech changes that occur, and it's not just Parkinson's, but it could be an atypical Parkinsonism like multiple system atrophy or progressive supranuclear palsy. And what they did that was so interesting is that Dr. Roos from the Czech Republic, from Brno, is actually a scientist who does machine learning, and so he was capturing data with the audio and correlating it to the clinician data that allowed him to identify problems much earlier. So they were a gentleman with multiple system atrophy, and they were able to identify a problem well before the actual definitive diagnosis. And for those who don't know what voice as a biometric means, it just simply means that you take your audio signal when you're speaking or when you're doing a loud ah or something like that, and we process that, and certain features are indicative of different problems. And again, kind of getting back to what Josefa was saying before, it's exciting because we can see a lot. It's scary because it can be misused. You know, they're able to use voice as a biometric to identify Parkinson's, to diagnose it. They're able to use it to diagnose various psychiatric conditions that are not related to Parkinson's, and diabetes and anxiety and comorbidities like depression, like that. And the problem is that we got to make sure that that's not being misused. But it's coming. It's coming for sure.
Was that in line with something that was mentioned in one of the talks, which was people that before you have diagnosed, often people have REM sleep behavior, so it's movements during the night, and one of them is talking. And then by assessing the voices of those people that didn't have the diagnosis, they could increase the probability of saying the risk that you had for developing Parkinson. So,
yeah, RBD is, for most of the people that we're talking to today, some of you may have had movements in your sleep before your diagnosis. It's not as common, but if you have RBD and you're not diagnosed with Parkinson's or something that looks like it, one of the atypicals, your risk of getting it eventually is much higher. And so what often you'll find in different research environments is that they'll find individuals who have RBD because they consider it a prodrome or a precursor to the Parkinson's and Parkinsonism. And so in that study you're talking about, it's really interesting is they had people who had RBD and they did the monitoring with the voice, and those that lost their sense of smell went on to get Parkinson's within 2 years, which is pretty fast. I mean, and then the ones who didn't have a loss of sense of smell didn't seem to manifest that, and he'll be continuing that and following those people for 5 years and 10 years, and we might find that it's a prodrome 5 years out, 8 years out, 10 years out, which until we get a drug that helps us, it becomes less helpful. But it would be very interesting to see what comes next with that. One last takeaway, and I won't get too far into it, is that the problem with these voice biometrics, I'm kind of working on a project with this right now, is that often we are really excited because it gets really high, robust, 94% accuracy, 92% accuracy, but then when you implement it on a phone or out in the wild, it falls apart because you got a terrible signal and you got background noise. Your vent is blowing when the heater's on, and all of a sudden you can hear it through the microphone, stuff like that. They were able to, with 16 minutes of connected noisy speech, noisy signal, were able to do the diagnostics they want. So I think that's what's coming is, again, dirty signal assessment because we have so much more of it, and it's exciting. Somebody's going to have to make this into a tool that we can use for exercise, though, because that's really what I care about.
So I think this is where AI probably comes in with the interest of you have so much information that we're gathering before, and then someone has to put it together, and hopefully AI can do that.
Yeah, and actually, we're going to.
What does this mean? This means that you have more accurate diagnosis. At this moment, I actually received an email today, and it was, if you want to know if you have the risk of diabetes, do this. So now you can identify if you're going to have a risk, and it's just we're coming to a point where we're going to identify the diseases we're going to have in the future. I mean, how do we deal with this? So there's a lot of ethical questions and mental health issues that we have to consider when we start diagnosing everything that I'm going to have in 20 years, right, or 30 years. So I think it's at the same time exciting for everyone that likes technology, but very scary for everyone else.
Absolutely, and there's a whole genetics section in this organization, and they talk quite a bit about counseling. It's kind of where people living with Huntington's have been for many years, because you can look at the amount of CAG repeats on the 13th allele, and you can identify if someone's going to have it, if they're going to have it earlier, if they're going to have it later, what kind of complications. We're getting to that with Parkinson's, and again, until we have a great treatment, it's not necessarily that valuable, and it can be a little bit scary, and it could be a little bit demotivating. But I think we'll eventually have a pharmacological solution that may be neuroprotective, or we may be able to do other things like exercise. And so that if you knew that you're at a risk, hopefully you can slow it down to a point where it doesn't show up until you're very, very old, or it doesn't show up at all.
Yeah. Obviously, we need solutions for who has Parkinson, and there was an update about, okay, so what do we have? And one of the key messages was that levodopa continues to be the best treatment. So this is slides that were presented to the scientific community, that levodopa continues to be the most effective. Its benefit is sustained, it's well tolerated, and it has obviously lots of research to support its efficacy. And then on another keynote, so this is all regarding pharmacological interventions. There's a discussion at this moment about when do we start giving levodopa to people with Parkinson? Should it be early on, because there's multiple medications and options that you can do, but and there's a tendency for sometimes people delaying taking levodopa with fear of developing those more involuntary movements that people tend to see. And so I think this it even has a name, which is levodopaphobia. There is a lot of fear around this, and this evidence that has come out is really helping us take that decision. And I'll say all the clinicians have now strong evidence to be able to recommend that there is no advantage to delaying taking levodopa right from the beginning, because the development of those movements will happen independently of the time that you start taking the levodopa.
I would say too, part of that is that then now we have a lot more tools, and this is something Dr. Falconer talks about all the time, but we have a lot more tools so that you can tweak the continuous release, and you can add the adjunct medication so that you can get around those fluctuations, the motor fluctuations, much more efficiently. And I think when the whole term about knowledge about delaying the levodopa sparing approach was coming out, those weren't there. So we really have a lot more tools if you work with a doctor that really knows how to take advantage of them, like Dr. Falconer and the others on his team.
Mm-hmm. So you can get a nice look. It's like, this is where your clinicians are going. They're listening to this. They have to make sense into their clinical experience, and they have to cross all this information. And it's a lot of information. So hats off to putting it all together and to being able to guide people in their journey. I think it's quite a challenge as well. So another one was regarding the dosages of levodopa, and it was interesting to say this was actually something highlighted, that sometimes you prescribe the levodopa, but making sure that we also tell the people with Parkinson that this might take several weeks. So every time you introduce some new medication, it would be nice, it would be useful for you to ask, when do I expect results, and what kind of results would I expect, so that you are guided in a more direct and useful way.
Come in here. There we go.
There was also a highlight for other types of medication, namely what we call agonists and dopamine agonists that will help in complementary levodopa. But here, a specific one that caught my attention, especially for young onset, which is the use maybe of agonists can bring certain risks, and so physicians should alert people with Parkinson who they prescribe this medication about this, right? And what they were highlighting is, so we're talking about compulsive behavior would be like gambling too much, shopping, even compulsive eating like chocolate. Women tend to refer a lot that eating, and then or gathering a lot of things. So it can be reflected, or imagine you're so focused on something like in a computer, collecting a lot of things that you don't need. So it's worth being attentive to these things, and guess what? It's related to the medication. Now that's I think important for people to know. They identify that people ages can be, so if you are younger, you're at higher risk of developing these type of behaviors, and also being male, having a history of addiction before, anxiety, and yeah, that's in terms of risks, of just highlighting the people that should be more alerted.
Another interesting thing that was coming down the pipeline, and you may have seen a little bit about this before, is an adaptive or closed-loop deep brain stimulation system. So Medtronic is the only company that's building this, and they currently have a trial with humans where they've implanted deep brain stimulation electrodes that are not only able to provide stimulation, as all of them do, but are actually able to listen for beta waves, and that's the indication of that there's dysfunction, those waves. And so they're using the thing that's providing the stimulation also as a sensor, and it's a really innovative approach. And what that allows them to do is automatically change the programming based on the amount of bad waves, about beta waves coming through there. So that's the closed loop thing. And actually, I know a couple people who were in that initial trial, so they're part of the ongoing cohort. And they say it's kind of like having an automatic, instead of a stick, because they can feel it changing, and they can feel the modifications, but not directly like physically, but they can feel how it's providing more or less stimulation in different environments. So they're getting more data on this. This is still not FDA approved and publicly available, but it does continue to make progress, and I do see a lot of opportunities. And as a matter of fact, that Rune Labs, the Strive PD app that we were talking about before, it actually has a partnership with Medtronic in order to process that data that's coming from the closed loop system and use that within their model. So again, I think it's coming along. Right now, Medtronic's the only one doing that. The other products, Boston Scientific and Abbott have other innovations that I really like current steering. And Abbott actually has a remote control device, so there's different reasons why you would do different things, but I do see this as something that's coming and that's interesting. Another one that's coming, and it's already available in the EU, but has not made it to the United States yet, and it's primarily because they're getting pushback for their pump, not because of the medication, is a formulation of levodopa, carbidopa-levodopa, like Cinemet, but you deliver it with a pump and a needle, and it's called a subcutaneous. So you just basically take this tiny little needle, you put it under the skin, you put a little piece of tape on it, and it stays there, and that's able to provide you ongoing, continuous, steady stream of levodopa throughout the day, and that has reduced dramatically the off and on times, the motor fluctuations, and provides more relief. So basically, it gives you another continuous release option. Previously, the same company had a product, and it's still out there, called Duopa or Duodopa, depending on which country you're in, and that actually puts the actual lead inside. It's a pump, and it goes through the stomach and goes through the pyloric sphincter, so it delivers the liquefied levodopa directly in the duodenum where it gets absorbed. And that's been very effective, but it is a bit of hardware. This pump is going to be much, much smaller, and if you have any issues or you need to change it around, you can just pull the needle out. It's very simple to use. I think both of them are pretty exciting. And there was a version of this before that a company in Israel called Neuroderm was trying to do, but the innovation of adding the FOS carbidopa and the FOS levodopa is that it seems to allow for a much higher formulation. So the equivalent of, I think, 40 pills or somewhere thereabouts, which is way more than anyone needs, where the other pump was stopping around 12. So that company's about gone, and this one's probably going to take over the marketplace.
I was going to add in, I already have about 3 or 4 patients that are already doing this. And so
Yeah.
it's the great advantage is to try to bypass the phenomenon of on-off. So that means off means when the medication is not working so well, those periods of the day where the person might feel more tired or more anxious or just not feeling themselves, right? Regarding, it's usually related to the time that you take the medication. And so what they really aim for this is that we have something continuous, and the feedback that I'm getting has been quite positive, because that means they have more hours where they can be more productive. Of course, it doesn't come without effort, because obviously there's some logistics around this, but even sleeping up, people are perceiving that it has an impact. So we're optimistic about it, but we know it doesn't come. It's easier to take a pill. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that'll be continued to be tweaked. There has been a version with apomorphine available for a while. That's a dopamine agonist, and that's still a possibility for some folks. But we've already mentioned some of the side effects, and apomorphine itself is actually the most powerful dopamine agonist that we have. So this seems like it's coming along. And again, the hiccup is on the pump. It's not on. It's on the hardware. It's not on the medication. We got to go to a nice session on this new formulation. It's a successor to Rytary Amneal. The same company has it. It's called Crexont, and basically it allows for a better version of their previously already very successful controlled release carbidopa-levodopa. And what Rytary was doing was basically having different coatings on different balls of carbidopa-levodopa, so they dissolve at different rates. It's very much like that old Contact commercial back in the day when you used to take that cold medication. And this has better results with their pH coating, and then they have something that's called a mucoadhesive coating that actually keeps the medication near the duodenum. So after it empties the stomach, right below the stomach is where we want the medications to stay, because that's where they get absorbed. That's the duodenum, and that's how it gets into the bloodstream. And so this is keeping it there more. 0.5 hours overall initial improvement, but actually when you tack on some of the other components, it's actually closer to an hour and a half. And you only have to take it 3 or 4 times a day. Many people with Parkinson's, when they're having more serious issues, could be taking it more than that and having the ups and downs. So it's a good addition to this, and coming along soon. And just got FDA approved about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. So we're just going to this other part is just things that we saw that were kind of interesting, things that make us go, because, we've been to, Josefa, your first conference was what, 2011?
Yeah, Amsterdam, I don't remember the date.
Oh, that was 2010. Okay, so yeah, you beat me by one. My first one was 2011 in Toronto, and I know we were both there. So we've been going to these for a while, and these are the things we saw. Like, this is the very first time we've ever seen a program for people living with Parkinson's with the
yes.
MDS.
So as I started this talk, is like one of the reasons for us to share this with you and to make a point of doing this talk is how do we get people more involved, people with Parkinson involved in these congresses. And I think it's nice to share, to see how many people are actually studying and really dedicated to doing a lot of research on this area. It should be a source of hope that there is. We are doing something, right? It's sometimes people are like, oh, we're not researching it enough. Everyone's focused on Alzheimer, but it's not true. There is a lot of work, a lot of research going on, and now we're trying to share more of these moments, and involving people with Parkinson in these congresses is one way to also provide that hope, right? So this was an event that was actually organized before the actual Congress started, and it was meant for patients and for people with Parkinson and their families as a summary of what was going to happen in the Congress. So I think it was a nice initiative from the MDS. It was the first year that they were doing this. So hopefully next year there will be more involvement. And so they actually created a group now which will be focusing on having people people with Parkinson register and being able to give feedback over things that they might do. So you can actually give your your feedback and your ideas about how the community can maybe serve you better. So I think that this is a changing point. This is very good from someone that works with nonprofits like we do, and this is very good news.
Yeah, no, it has been very long been doctor focused, and so now it's growth, and it's good growth. This is a new paper that came out recently with a lot of very top named movement disorder specialists that is trying to redefine Parkinson's from more of a biological definition of what's causing it rather than simply talking about it being a protein misfolding issue. And I think it's controversial, and this is not solved. As a matter of fact, at the end of this presentation on this topic, one of the very top specialists, Mark Halliday, the NIH, who has been involved with the society since its founding in 1985, actually brought up some of the really classic concerns about, well, right now, until we know more about this, it's a distinction without a difference because we're treating one or the other. But I don't think it's going to be that forever. I think this is the beginning of a bigger conversation that will help us hopefully get to better precision medicine. But right now, I think there are battle lines being drawn, and it'll be interesting to watch. Alberto Espe at the University of Cincinnati frequently talks about his lack of faith that misfolded alpha-synuclein is at the basis, and I think he makes compelling statements, but he's early. This was just an interesting one. Madrid was in 2022. That was the first time we came live after COVID, and one of my colleagues was talking about how COVID and Parkinsonism may interact. If anyone's ever seen that old movie with Robin Williams called Awakenings, where they talked about people who had basically like a version of Parkinson's that wasn't quite like Parkinson's. It came from a flu that happened in the 20s, and it affected a bunch of people, and it led to this issue. And this is not quite the immediate response that we're talking about, but in this presentation, they said that just getting COVID in the future will lead to a future risk of getting Parkinson's that increases by 150%. And if you get subsequent COVID, you might increase that risk over time, although that study did not point that out directly. I want to be real clear that I don't misquote this, because it's something we've kind of figured might happen. Certainly there's people who get the flu often have over time, and people who have more flu shots over their lifetime seem to have a lower risk, and we think it's because of lower insults. And because COVID has been such a big factor in all of our lives for the past 5 years, it's interesting to see what that might be, and we'll probably see a bit of a bump, 20, 30 years, just because we think that COVID is definitely related to it in some factor. Environmental factors, we're speaking of the biological definition, we're learning more and more about not just pesticides, paraquat being one of them, rotenone, which is really more of a pesticide now. We don't use it for farming. And then trichloroethylene is a really big offender, being used as an industrial cleaner, being used in dry cleaners, being used in military environments. We're finding very high rates of correlation between exposure to that and Parkinson's later on, air pollution and dementia later on. And so I think we're getting closer to having that conversation in a really fulsome manner so that we can really start changing public policy. So when you start making a decision about like, well, this is going to cost industry this much money, you can also come back and say, well, it's also going to make someone very unfortunate to get Parkinson's, and there's a human cost to that, and there's obviously a financial cost to that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation more than some of the other ones. And returning back to that biological definition we talked about, this is a book that's been quite popular. You may have seen one of the authors speaking on this topic, but they're absolutely getting to the point that not all Parkinson's is being caused by us, but a significant amount of it enough that we should be focusing on reducing those factors, and we can probably have a big impact on the amount of people who are suffering from this disease 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the future. It's interesting that Alzheimer's actually, its rate of growth is slowing. There's less people because we figured out some of the risk factors and we're able to eliminate that. We haven't eliminated Alzheimer's by any stretch, but it's slowing down. Parkinson's is actually speeding up, and we don't quite know why, but we suspect that some of it's going to be environmental.
Yes, so there was also some interest regarding being diagnosed with Parkinson below the age of 55 is usually a cutoff that is used to define early onset Parkinson's disease, or you might know it by young onset. There is a discussion about which terminology to use. The medical and the clinicians have identified that it is probably best defined by early onset instead of young onset. And lots of this talk was particularly interesting. It was one of my favorite because there was a lot of coverage about how people with that are younger will have to juggle a lot. They will have to live with the disease for many years. And so just getting the diagnosis is usually challenging on its own. They were highlighting how maybe there was some impact on what we call social cognition. So that means changes in facial expression might have an impact on how we interact with others, how we also interpret something that's happening in the room. So it's not likely, but if it shouldn't be taken lightly, because communication is what makes us humans, and so being able to understand that maybe that person is upset or is not engaged in something is important. It's an important skill. And then also highlighting the topics that I said that were more related to pregnancy and also planning. So with early onset, you can see that that's very relevant. They were highlighting a lot of the research that had come out that was relevant. The younger age that you get diagnosed, the more risk of having an impact on your quality of life. This was what the study was highlighting. And one of the factors that had most impact was depression and also daytime sleepiness, were actually two factors that will most contribute to reducing quality of life. So independently of the age onset, depression was the one that was outstanding. So if we can manage and if we know this, then we can try to really focus on identifying these things early on. If the person is depressed, and then you treat depression, right? It's treatable. One of the focuses was because people live long with this, live many years, that means that we can start thinking about different types of interventions. There is an opportunity for us to really be able to manage this disease better. And then next slide, John. Yeah. It was also curious from my perspective, because sometimes we don't invest enough time with these things, especially in this scenario, in this context. But no, in this talk they highlighted lots of resources that exist, mostly from nonprofits, where you can get some guidance. And so this is them showing the the physicians and the clinicians that these resources are out there, and that you can share this with the people that you treat. So this is like the kind of things that we would share with you if we're giving a talk. But for the doctors who have access to this, I was very happy to see that.
Job accommodations and stuff.
Yes, yeah. So this is another example of, maybe sensitive topics, and trying to really dive deeply and try to understand what are the factors that are contributing, what can we really do to reduce the impact of these situations. And this sexual dysfunction was one of them. Again, highlighting to young onset. Okay, and I think one of the questions that always rises in regarding being diagnosed really young is also genetic testing as well, even in older ages or in more advanced ages, because there's always concerns about will this have an impact over my family as well, but specifically in genetic and people having kids. And so this was just nothing specifically new, but just trying to understand, trying to guide the clinicians on who should we be testing. It's someone that got diagnosed early, someone that has a positive family history, or that has higher ethnical backgrounds. So those were the focus on where you should not miss trying to get that genetic testing going.
I'm going to keep a light touch on this next one because I want to respect our time a little bit. But we want to just break down that we have a lot of our stuff today to things that are coming pretty quickly and not something that's really far apart. So, when you look at a research and you get something in the mail, or you have a well-meaning family member, they go, hey, look at this, but it's in mice, it's not as interesting. until we get to the late human phase 3, phase 4, that's really where its implementation in a way that you're going to be able to use becomes relevant. So it's not that this is not interesting in a petri dish or in an animal that's not like a primate or primates, those kind of studies. Those things are difficult to translate into actual humans, and it's not until we get to the really early phases that we have anything that I'm interested in as far as a clinician. Not that bench research is not important. We need those things in the pipeline. But just talking to everyone in this room, we want something that you're going to be able to use. So this Gain Therapeutics has been making really great gains, great progress in a product that may be neuroprotective, and we don't have anything that's neuroprotective. And so I'm watching that, and I'm keeping it on the radar. But at this point, it's in a mouse model. So until I see it tried in a human, I'm probably not going to get too excited. And then the opposite is that pump that we're talking about. That this is the late stage human trial. This is what's coming down the pike. And again, it's already available in Europe. It will be available in the United States. And then somewhere in the middle would be something where there are some early human trials. One reason why I mentioned this one is because it's using what we call glial-derived neurotrophic factor, GDNF, which is actually produced when we exercise, and it's something that we all need. And there have been interesting studies trying to implant that before. So this one I'm watching a little bit more, and their early data is good. The only problem with a GDNF, it's a growth factor, so the window for growth is going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. They're not going to be able to do this study in 18 months and then go to the next one. It's going to take 5 years for them to get their first study results, and then they can go to the next one. But it still mentioned that they're looking soon to have their next one. They're recruiting for this, and that'd be a study to consider. Very experimental, not try this medication that's an old medication that we reformulated. The MDS, again, is slowly becoming a lot more friendly to different populations beyond doctors. I chair the section that's for allied health professionals, and we have grown a lot. We're nearly 3,000 members. We're nearly a quarter of their membership. But they also produce materials that are intended for people with lived experience, people living with Parkinson's, and then other clinicians. And so they have a lot of stuff on their website if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. And Josefa, do you have anything to add on that? I mean, they've been doctor focused for a long time, but they're getting better.
Yeah, we tend to think that, let's say I don't underestimate a person with Parkinson. It's just like, oh, it's too in depth, right? Most of these sessions, you get out of the session and you feel that your mind has been tortured, right? Because it's really, really deep information. But everyone has their own profession, and so I think we should never underestimate. If you really want to get more information, that is a website where you know that you have secure information. But just be prepared that it's very medical, it's very technical.
Absolutely. When I was going to one of the main neurobiology of Parkinson's, on my left was an attorney that I knew I'd met previously living with Parkinson's. And again, it was dense material, but it was interesting. And I would say the conversation and questions she asked when I was talking with her, a lot more relevant than, what this molecule is doing, at least for me, at least from a practical perspective.
I identify different types of people with Parkinson, and it's like there's people that really like to get a lot of information and they read everything. And then there's others that, I just prefer that you summarize it. And the experience when I came back from the Congress, I had this family from one of the people with Parkinson, and she says, so what's new? And I said, well, in 1 minute, I can just tell you that there's a big focus on trying to identify people at risk of Parkinson, so that we can have a global intervention about how we can reduce the incidence that's growing a lot. There's a lot of focus on technology. And then at the end of, maybe I spoke 1 minute, and she said, oh, so there's nothing new. And I said, well, I know you want the cure, but we're working on it. And I think what's new is just we're getting together so we can try to get better information and share that information. So it's like, as I said, it's hopefully in 1 hour we were able to share with you some of the things that the scientific community is excited about. And it's usually translated to, we want this information so that we can provide better care for you.
Anyone has any more questions, they can catch us by email or talk to Sonia. Otherwise, I really appreciate you joining us for today. I know it was dense, but I think it's good to hear kind of what your doctors are seeing and what we're all looking at in the next 18 months, 2 years. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for hanging in there.
Shit.